Hi there, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is. Welcome to Left Side of the Aisle. I'm your host, Larry Erickson. And for the next almost half hour, I'm going to be talking about some things that I sincerely hope you'll be interested in. If you have any reactions, you can email them to me directly, my personal email. As always, Whoviating, WHOVIATING at AOL.com. Or go to my website, Lotus Surviving a Dark Time, which will be your will be here. And you can leave a comment there, or you can get the email address from there. If you do send me email, please include something in the subject line, make it clear this is not spam, and be patient about getting an answer because I stink at answering email. So with that, there's actually several things in the show are going to be things that I haven't talked about in a while. So in a way, you can consider this kind of like a lot of it's a bunch of updates of old topics. For example, one that I haven't talked about in a while is the issue of same-sex marriage and overall LGBTQ rights. One sign of the slow but grinding change in that is that a guy named Craig Powell, he's a member of the Utah legislature. He has proposed a bill that would remove terms like husband and wife from Utah state law and replace it with the non-gendered spouse. He also said he's proposing drafting a proposed constitutional amendment to remove the ban on same-sex marriages from the Utah state constitution. He says this is just a matter of facing legal reality. Now, I don't expect to see this pass, but the fact that a Utah Republican could introduce such a bill indicates that, yeah, there's something going on. Next up, however, is the execrable Roy Moore, Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court, who on January 6th ordered the state's county probate judges to ignore the Supreme Court ruling striking down state bans on same-sex marriage and to refuse to issue licenses for such marriages, arguing that, quoting him, nothing in the United States Constitution alters or overrides their ministerial duty to, in effect, place Alabama law above federal law. Unhappily for the unrepentant bigot Moore, most Alabama counties ignored his order and continued issuing same-sex marriage licenses, and one of the handful that did follow his order reversed itself the next day. But that doesn't mean that bigots have given up either in Alabama or other places. For example, an anti-same-sex marriage bill was introduced in South Carolina in December that declared Obergefell v. Hodges, that's the Supreme Court decision that struck down bans on same-sex marriage, declared Obergefell v. Hodges, quote, unauthoritative, void, and of no effect. And again, they essentially declared that state law overrides federal law and decisions of the Supreme Court. And a similar bill was introduced in Tennessee in September. This nation fought the bloodiest war in its history over the issue of slavery, but the underlying legal issues involved were nullification and interposition, which were essentially the supposed rights of states to nullify or block federal authority within their borders. Apparently, there are those who are willing to repeat that experience to promote and maintain their own bigoted sickness. I suppose it really must be galling to be so far out of step with history. Meanwhile, two things internationally on this front were kind of interesting. Last month, a bill allowing for same-sex civil unions was passed in the Greek parliament by a wide margin. One Greek campaigner for equal rights said the bill, quoting him, does not provide equality before the law, especially in regard to adoption and custody of children, but it comes close. Latvia is now the only country in the European Union which does not recognize some form of same-sex partnership, either civil unions or marriage. Now, this action by the parliament did not come without opposition in the notoriously homophobic Greece. For example, the Greek Orthodox bishop, and I want to make sure I pronounce this right, Ambrosios of Kalfavirta, called on the church faithful to spit on LGBT people when you encounter them, condemn them, blacken them. They are not human. They are freaks of nature, he said. On the other hand, in one of those perhaps grudging acknowledgments of reality, another Greek prelate, his name is Chrysostomos, the Metropolitan of Messenia, he said, quote, "Homosexuals, like all humans, are a creation of God, and they deserve the same respect and honor, not violence and rejection." Now, admittedly, that is several steps short of actually endorsing LGBT rights, but in the context of what surrounds them, it's still a noteworthy statement. Finally, the development that I personally find the most interesting. A man named Sun Wen Lin, now that's a pseudonym, that's not his real name, but a man named Sun Wen Lin has filed a lawsuit after he was denied a marriage application for himself and his same-sex partner. What makes the case particularly interesting is that this is happening in China. This is the first such suit in that nation's history. Sun is basing his claim on what could be considered a technicality. The original text of the marriage law does not say one man and one woman, but husband and wife, which are not necessarily gendered terms. Meanwhile, in China, hormone and electric shock therapy to cure the gay remain fairly common. Technically, they are legal, but the police don't seem to be doing much about it. A decision on Sun's suit is expected within 6 months. All right, going on from there, we have 2 RIPs this week. And the first one, in its own way, is just a little bit creepy. 2 weeks ago, I told you about the death of Native American activist and poet John Trudell, who died of cancer at the age of 69. Last week, it was David Bowie, who died of cancer at the age of 69. This year, I note the death of the actor who could dominate a scene with just his voice, the great Alan Rickman, who died of cancer at the age of 69. Now, Alan Rickman, I expect, is known to most people as Professor Severus Snape in the Harry Potter movies, and perhaps as Alexander Dane in that great Star Trek spoof called Galaxy Quest. Although his breakout roles were as bad guy Hans Gruber in Die Hard and as Jamie in the movie Truly, Madly, Deeply. But even before that, he was known and respected for his stage work. Now, the odd thing about Alan Rickman for me is that when I first saw him in the Harry Potter movies, I knew who he was. Now, I'm not much of a moviegoer. I never saw Die Hard, I never saw Truly, Madly, Deeply, and I didn't see Galaxy Quest until later on DVD. But when I saw him, I knew who he was, and I have no idea how I knew him. Which I suppose only goes to show how memorable his performances could be. So R.I.P. Alan Rickman. And with our other R.I.P., another bit of my earlier years drops away. Glenn Frey, Eagles guitarist, co-founder of the group, and a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee, died January 18th. He was 67. According to a statement by the band, he, and I'm quoting, fought a courageous battle for the past several weeks, but succumbed to complications from rheumatoid arthritis, acute ulcerative colitis, and pneumonia. Frey co-wrote or sang, or both, some of the Eagles' most successful songs, including, among others, Tequila Sunrise, Peaceful Easy Feelin', Take It Easy, and Lion Eyes. In my personal opinion, one of the best comments about his death came from a columnist for the Los Angeles Times who said of the Eagles, quote, "Few bands were better at distilling the vibe of Los Angeles in the 1970s. Thing is, from the late 60s to the late 70s, the cultural image of Southern California was one of a mellow, laid-back embrace of sun and surf, and the Eagles certainly reflected that. That columnist, in fact, called Frey LA's mellow ambassador. That same embrace of that culture, however, still earns the group scorn from those who claim that their music was just pap, apparently because it was neither hard-edged nor hostile. One of those people even said that hating the Eagles was the mark of whether or not you were interested in music or just being a bandwagon jumper. So I will say this, on behalf of Eagles fans and Glenn Frey's career, I have neither tolerance for nor patience with those who equate popularity with inferiority and obscurity with significance, and spend their energy desperately trying to prove how hip they are by sneering about how much they hate music that other people like. So with that, I say R.I.P. Glenn Frey, and encourage all of you to go out and find the acoustic version of Hotel California. All right, and now for the Clown Award, given as always for an act of meritorious stupidity, one of our weekly features. I almost gave the big red nose this week to a guy named Mark Cole. He's a member of the Virginia House of Delegates. He is so creepily obsessed with the idea that transgender students might use the wrong restroom that he's introduced a bill saying that, and I'm quoting the bill, local school boards shall develop and implement policies that require every school restroom, locker room, or shower room that is designated for use by a specific gender to solely be used by individuals whose anatomical sex matches such gender designation, with anatomical sex defined in the bill as the physical condition of being male or female, which is determined by a person's anatomy. Now, what should be to you and should have been to him, I expect, immediately apparent, is that there's no way that schools could actually enforce this requirement except by examining the genitals of any student that wanted to use the restroom, which in most places would be regarded as sexual assault. This is some powerful stupid. You really didn't think that through, did you, Marky? So yeah, I thought he was a shoo-in for the Clown Award until the next day. So this week, the big red nose goes to South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. She gave the gobber response to the amazing Mr. O's State of the Union address and got some pushback because she said something about not following the angriest voices. In defending herself afterward, she said this, quoting, "We've never in the history of this country passed any laws or done anything based on race or religion." And I really don't think I need to go on with any explanation. South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, this week's and already in the running for the year's biggest clown. All right, this is an update on something. 2 weeks ago, I declared the murder of Tamir Rice to be my outrage of the year for 2015. I have to add a footnote to that. As I expect you know, the grand jury did not indict Timothy Lehman, the Cleveland cop who shot Tamir to death, a decision that Cayuga County prosecuting attorney Timothy McGinty admits he led the grand jury to take. In defending himself and the grand jury, McGinty presented what amounted to a defense attorney's summation of the case. The point here is now in the course of that, he said, and I'm quoting, "The actions of the officers during the events leading up to the deadly force encounter," he said, "are not legally relevant to evaluating the split-second judgments made immediately before the deadly force incident." This is flat out false. Period. As two experts hired by the Rice family note, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, which includes Ohio, had found in 2008 that, quoting, "where a police officer unreasonably places himself in harm's way, his use of deadly force may be deemed excessive." That is, the cop's behavior of racing up to within a few feet of Tamir and Lehman jumping out of the car with his gun already drawn and with his safety off, creating the very supposed risk that Lehman claimed he was responding to when he shot down Tamir Rice, that was relevant to whether or not the shooting was reasonable. If, in fact, McGinty told the grand jury that the cop's behavior was not legally relevant, he flat out lied to the panel. Either that, or he and his office are so ignorant of the relevant law that he is incompetent to hold his office. But then here's the question. What are the consequences for a prosecutor who lies to a grand jury? I mean, not with some hypothetically perfect legal world, but in reality. Is it in fact illegal for a prosecutor to lie to the grand jury? And if they do, what consequences are there going to be? Because who is going to pursue them against the prosecutor? This whole thing stinks worse than it ever. And I need a break. And here we are back again. All right, another front that I haven't talked about a lot lately, not given a lot of attention, global warming, aka climate change. Some months ago, I noted that 2015 was on track to be the warmest year on record. Well, guess what? It didn't get sidetracked. On January 20th, NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, announced that 2015 was in fact the warmest year since records began in 1880. The conclusion was seconded by NASA, which does its own independent analysis of the data. Gavin Schmidt, director of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies, labeled 2015 as, quote, remarkable even in the context of the larger long-term warming trend. A trend that has seen 15 of the 16 warmest years on record occurring since 2001. Now, what that means, in case you didn't catch that, what that means is, from 2001 on, each one of those years has been warmer than any year from 1880 to 2000, except for one, and that was 1998. So much for the global warming has stopped, or there hasn't been any warming in X number of years, touted off by the nanny naysayers. One of the reasons that 2015 was a record-breaking year, and the record it broke, by the way, was set in 2014, was because of a strong El Nino. And in fact, that same impact, that same cycle, according to research published by the British Met Office, will drive 2016 to be even warmer than 2015. As a sidebar, by the way, don't expect the nanny naysayers to cite El Nino in an attempt to dismiss this record-breaking heat. It was, in fact, a strong El Nino year that drove 1998's warmth, that again being the year they always cite to claim that there's been no warming since such and such. So if they cite El Nino, they're actually undermining their own argument. Then again, that's never stopped them before. All right, what's more, all this could easily get worse. A study published January 18th in the scientific journal Nature Climate Change showed that the amount of human-made heat energy absorbed by the oceans of the world has doubled since 1997. And what the researchers claim is a rough but reliable estimate. The world's oceans absorbed approximately 150 zettajoules of energy from 1865 to 1997, and then another 150 zettajoules in the next 18 years. Now, to give you an idea of how much energy we are talking about, if you exploded one Hiroshima-sized atomic bomb every second for 1 year, the total energy released would be about 2 zettajoules. So in the past 18 years, Earth's oceans have absorbed human-made heat energy equivalent to setting off a Hiroshima-sized bomb every second for 75 years. These are staggeringly big numbers, and they show just how much heat energy is going into the oceans, which also means sparing us from the direct effect of that heat on surface temperatures. In fact, 90% of the heat energy we generate goes into the oceans, and every year deeper and deeper parts of the ocean are warming. The thing is, at some point, no one knows just where that is, but at some point, the oceans will reach the saturation point, and they will be unable to absorb any more of the energy that we generate. And global warming, that is surface temperatures, will skyrocket because there will be nowhere else for the heat to go. All of which may be part of the reason why the latest survey of world business and economic leaders by the World Economic Forum ranks climate change as their #1 concern. Now, it didn't say anything about what these people are proposed to do about climate change, but it does indicate that the economic elites are beginning to realize that climate change is not something off in the distant future or that only affects small countries and unimportant people, but but climate change, especially by virtue of the extreme weather events it generates, can actually have a direct impact on their wallets, and that will get them going. which would be more encouraging were it not for the fact that recent psychological research shows that denialists have, quote, disproportionate influence, unquote, on people who are already inclined to be skeptical. Put another way, it found that the naysayers were not to any degree swayed by facts, which we already suspected, but it's still disheartening to see it experimentally proved. We are so screwed. All right, another topic that I have not talked a lot about lately is the economy. And here just a few figures show everything that's wrong. 56% of Americans have less than $1,000 in their checking and savings accounts combined. A majority of us literally are living paycheck to paycheck. Almost 2/3 of Americans, 63%, do not have enough money in their savings for an emergency, defined as an unexpected expense of $500 to $1,000. A substantial majority of Americans would need to borrow money from a friend, from a bank account, take it out on their credit card, if an unexpected expense of as little as $500 came up. This, by the way, was all according to a survey cited by Forbes, which had the takeaway from the survey, not that the economy sucks, or that the wealth continues to congeal at the top, or that people are underpaid, or that chronic long-term unemployment remains stubbornly high, but rather that, quoting, Americans are terrible savers. Which becomes rather bitterly funny when it's recalled that in June, John Hilsenrath, who was the chief economics correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, was grousing that Americans are saving too much and spending too little. Meanwhile, the richest 0.1% of Americans have almost as much wealth as the bottom 90% combined, and income inequality is at its highest level since 1928. As Ben Norton, a politics staff writer at Salon magazine, wrote, the term middle class is useless because, as he noted, we don't have one anymore. I have for some time been saying that we are increasingly becoming a two-class nation of a small number of rich and a large number of poor or working poor, and it just seems that every day there is more evidence to demonstrate that. Worldwide, the situation is even worse. Income and wealth inequality continue to steadily worsen. According to Oxfam, in 2010, the world's 388 richest people had the same amount of wealth as the bottom 50% of the world's population. By 2014, that 388 had shrunk to 80. In 2015, it was 62. Just 62 people together were as rich as the entire combined wealth of half the world's population. Indeed, since 2010, the wealth of that lowest 50% has actually dropped by about 41%. The world is hideously and immorally unequal, and that inequality is not only increasing, it's accelerating. And for all the talk about how much they worry about the inequality, our economic and political elites seem revealingly uninterested in actually doing anything about it, except in cases such as global climate change, where the inequality becomes so severe as to threaten their bottom line and to threaten what they value. In fact, threaten the thing that they value second only to their bottom line, which is stability. Those who are now gathering at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, which I am forever tempted to call Davros, no matter what platitudes they may mouth, they are not on your side. They don't give a damn about you, except insofar as you affect their bank accounts. And don't think it's any better here. Don't. Do you really think the politicos of both parties who blather on about this non-existent middle class really have your interest at heart? I mean, I know I don't have to convince you about people like Paul Ranton and Ted Crazy and Donald the Rump, but do you really believe, for example, that Hillary Clinton, who has so many ties to Wall Street that it looks like some kind of kinky bondage party, is going to challenge the interest in the bankers any more than did Barack Obama? who failed to prosecute Wall Street crooks, even going so far as to specifically refuse to follow up on criminal referrals from the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission, which was set up to investigate criminality in the 2008 collapse. Barack Obama, who as a result of that let bankers get away with, in the words of one source, theft, wire fraud, bank fraud, loan fraud, securities fraud, and commodities fraud, while millions of Americans lost their life savings and their homes, and even as his own Justice Department made investigating mortgage fraud its lowest ranked national criminal priority and closed hundreds of cases with little or no investigation, and who depended for economic advice on the likes of Tim Geithner, and has stood silent as the too big to fail banks have gotten even bigger? Do you really think people like that are on your side? On the side of the 56%, the 63%, the 90%? Do not believe it, not even for a second. Now, I'm not going to tell you that every leader, every office holder, every politician, every rich person is a solely self-interested scumbag. I suppose I could say that Bernie Sanders is an exception, largely based on the fact that he's been saying exactly the same things for like 40 years now, even though he's not the socialist he claims to be or that he's often painted as. But in any event, I do say, with regard to these people, that guilty until proven innocent is a good and reliable standard. In fact, you want something to look for, to consider when hoping for innocence in these people? See what they have to say, if anything, about one of the most important, unappreciated, and little considered scandals of American economic life. In fact, this is my outrage of the week: forced arbitration. I've been meaning to bring this up for some time, so I'll take this opportunity. And in the words of the Alliance for Justice, so you understand what this is. Arbitration, I'm quoting the group, arbitration is a process in which a private firm is hired to settle a dispute without going to court. It was designed as a voluntary alternative to litigation among corporate equals. It has been twisted today into a tool by powerful corporations to force consumers and employees to surrender their right to hold corporations accountable for wrongdoing before an impartial court. Dozens and dozens of major companies in fields, dozens of fields, from telecommunications to credit cards, student loans, nursing homes, consumer goods, home builders, financial advisors, and of course software and more, have these noxious provisions in their agreements, as do many employment agreements. To use the service, to buy the product, to get the job, you must agree to a contract in which you sign away your rights and your access to the courts, including, perhaps most significantly, your ability to be part of a class action suit. Arbitration has gone from a voluntary process between equals to a requirement, a demand put by the more powerful on the less powerful, in effect making them powerless. Clauses requiring arbitration of any dispute between the consumer or employee and the corporation, banning any resort to the courts, arbitration to take place at a place and under conditions set down by the corporation in the contract. Those agreements are now routinely buried in the fine print of any agreement you make by clicking on "accept these terms." The result is that when a dispute arises, you have to face the corporation alone and on its own turf and on its own terms, first assuming that what you could achieve is even worth the time and expense. Which is why, as the Alliance for Justice has said, forced arbitration gives corporations a free pass to break the law because they know there is little of any chance that they will be brought to account for it. And that practice is expanding. The New York Times recently reported how debt collection agencies are using forced arbitration provisions in the debts they buy to claim that they, too, are covered by these forced arbitration clauses, even though the consumers had no contract with the debt collector, an argument which is being accepted by the courts. Now, there is a bill that's been introduced in Congress called the Arbitration Fairness Act, which would ban these kind of forced arbitration provisions. So the next time some politico tries to tell you how concerned they are about the economy and how concerned they are about you, ask them if they agree with outlawing forced arbitration. And if they say anything other than a direct yes, outlaw forced arbitration, tell them to buzz off, because they are not on your side. They are on the side of big business. And that is an outrage. And that's it. I'm done for this week. So we're going to get out of here. We will see you in 2 weeks. Remember, from now on, last week of the month, we're going to take a break. So we will see you in 2 weeks. You have the best 2 weeks you possibly can. And for now, as always, peace.